We're going to talk about embedded references today. The Modern Language Association just released its 8th edition, and they are officially called in-text references, so we're probably going to shift that language, but for now, this is how the slideshow is made. So does the author expertise strengthen your thesis statement? And that's really a big question that we're going to talk about today. So let's pretend this is my thesis statement. While there are a number of cutting-edge technology companies that develop innovative personal computing devices, few design products that anticipate consumer needs and desires like Apple Computer. And so I found this article, and it's called Inventing the Future, and it's by a guy named Walter Isaacson. And there's this passage down there in red, and this is the passage. I'm not going to read it to you. But I've paraphrased that passage with this statement. So it's not the same. It's not an actual direct quote, but it is what I've got. And it is paraphrased. It's not common knowledge, and I need to explain where I got that information. So here's the original article passage on the left. Here's what the student, or I in this instance, paraphrased. And so the question is, how do we talk about this source? And we could do it in the way that is on the top with just a parenthetical reference, or we could do it the way it is on the bottom. Now, caution, ML8 just came out, and I would have to choose one or the other, either the parenthetical reference or talking about the source in the body of the writing. But like I said, this is how the slideshow is made. This is how it's staying for now. So the question on the bottom one is really like, what goes into that ellipse? And that's really going to determine which is the preferable way to present that information. So we have to find out information about Walter Isaacson, and if it strengthens your thesis statement, then you're going to use it. So what do we need to learn? Obviously, who is Walter Isaacson? Well, it turns out that Walter Isaacson is a biographer, and he's done some pretty impressive biographies, one of which is, as far as I'm concerned, and I've read a few, the definitive biography on Steve Jobs. But he's also written one on Einstein and Ben Franklin. These are all innovators, and actually most recently he wrote this book called The Innovators, and that, of course, was really the basis for the article that we found that we are actually paraphrasing. So here's my statement. Here's my thesis. And the bottom line is this. No one has more expertise, really, to sort of strengthen that thesis statement than Walter Isaacson. So we're going to go with this statement about basically where we're giving author attribution. While researching his latest book about the creators of the computer and the internet, Walter Isaacson, who also wrote acclaimed biographies about Einstein, Franklin, and Jobs, said that Jobs placed higher value on creating organizations with the capacity to continually develop innovative products than on creating innovative products themselves. And that right there, that passage, strengthens my thesis. Whereas this bottom example, not so much. So what you have in the parentheses is really basically a roadmap that will bring you back to that citation in the work cited. And it's very important that whatever goes in the parentheses is exactly what appears in the first part of the entry in the citation. But we're going to shift gears completely, and we're going to look at another example. And this is an article about executives. The core of Apple is returning. Steve Jobs is the embodiment of the firm's principles. And it's written by a woman named Alex Pham, and it was written in the Los Angeles Times in 2008. So I Googled Alex, and it turns out that Alex is a journalist whose specializations include these things. And yeah, she left the Los Angeles Times, and she's doing other kinds of work now. So she's a journalist. She's not an expert. So when I'm looking at this passage that I want to add to my research paper to support my thesis statement, the question is, does Alex's expertise strengthen my thesis? And the answer is no. And yeah, we're going to stick to this one way of citing it. We're not going to go on a whole, like, sort of digression about Alex Pham, because Alex Pham is not the kind of expert that, let's say, Walter Isaacson is. I mean, Walter Isaacson has done, he spent years and years and years researching three innovators. Alex has done a number of 600 or 1,200 word articles about a handful of people. So there's a real difference in their expertise. And she's really not somebody that we're going to dedicate a whole chunk of our essay to. However, it's just as important that whatever is in the parentheses is a direct roadmap to the passage in that citation in the work cited. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how this applies to op-ed. So Peggy Noonan is a famed Wall Street Journal op-ed columnist, and she was a special assistant to the president in the White House of Ronald Reagan, and she has a long history as a journalist, but that's really her specialization, her expertise. So she'll write articles about the 2016 election, as well as writing articles about fairly random things like millennials. So if Peggy Noonan authored a resource, would you embed attribution, or would you just reference it parenthetically? And here's the thing, is it really depends on your thesis statement. So if my thesis statement is about Washington politics, well, yeah, Peggy Noonan has a lot of expertise around that area. And if this were my thesis statement, I'm not going to read every thesis statement I have for you, and this was her quote, and here's the excerpted quote, then yes, author attribution to Peggy Noonan definitely strengthens your thesis statement. However, if my thesis statement is about global warming, as it is in this case, and this is her quote, and this is the paraphrased idea, then author attribution really doesn't strengthen my thesis at all. So we're going to take that out and just leave it just leave a parenthetical reference. So we'll shift that to another op-ed columnist, this one for the New York Times, Tom Friedman, and he served as the Beirut bureau chief in 1982, Jerusalem in 84, and he was then in Washington as a diplomatic correspondent in 89, and then he later in the White House correspondent. So he has a lot of specialization in both the Middle East and basically foreign policy politics. And he too, just like Peggy Noonan, will write articles about random things or about things about which he is a great expert. So if he had authored the resource, would you embed attribution or just reference him, parenthetically? And again, just like in the last case, it depends on your thesis statement. So if this is my thesis statement and I'm writing about Syrian refugees, well then yes, I definitely want to give author attribution to Tom Friedman. Whereas if I'm writing about Disney movies, and that's his quote, and that's my paraphrased idea, I'm not going to give author attribution. I'm just going to give a parenthetical reference.